You've definitely heard the old saying, we only use 10% of our brain. It is arguably one of the most persistent myths in popular science. But for a moment, let's pretend it's true. What if we could flip an invisible switch and unlock the remaining 90%? This wouldn't just make us smarter. It would transform us into something completely different, beings with capabilities that seem like magic today. In this video, we're taking the boldest mental journey possible. We'll explore 20 incredible abilities humanity could gain by tapping into 100% of its brain power. Get ready, because some of these concepts might genuinely shock you. The real question is, are we even ready for that kind of power? Let's find out. Before we dive into the world of superpowers, let's quickly address the 10% myth itself. Where did this idea even come from? It's often wrongly attributed to Albert Einstein, though there's zero proof he ever said anything of the sort. Most likely, the myth arose from a misinterpretation of early 20th century neurobiology research. These early researchers observed that only specific regions of the brain were active at any given moment, leading to the flawed conclusion that the rest was dormant. Modern scanning technology, like MRIs and PT scans, clearly shows we use every part of our brain, just for different tasks and at different times. Even when we sleep, our brain is intensely active. So, when we discuss using 100%, we're not talking about activating sleeping zones. Instead, we mean the hypothetical amplification and expansion of every single existing function to its absolute peak. It would be like your old desktop computer suddenly becoming a quantum supercomputer, capable of performing trillions of operations simultaneously. This core assumption is the key to our thought experiment. We are proceeding under the premise that the brain wouldn't just work harder, it would unlock entirely new principles of interacting with reality itself. Let's start with the first and arguably the most anticipated superpower: full telekinesis, the ability to move objects purely through mental force. But let's imagine this capability not as depicted in the movies, where the hero just scowls. At a 100% mastery level, this would mean absolute and precise control over matter at a distance. You wouldn't just be sliding a mug, you would be sensing every single one of its atoms, its exact temperature, and its internal molecular tension. Mastery would begin small. You would start by learning to levitate dust motes in the air, assembling them into complex, intricate patterns. This would require colossal concentration. Initially, just 5 minutes of practice would leave you collapsing from mental exhaustion, similar to recovering from a brutal physical workout. Your brain consuming massive amounts of glucose would necessitate a highly specialized diet. This would give rise to kinetic athletes, competing to see who could lift the heaviest weights or assemble the most complex mechanism remotely. Construction would be permanently revolutionized. Instead of cranes, teams of kinetics would lift and install multi-ton support beams with millimeter precision. Surgeons could perform operations without a single incision, manipulating a patient's internal organs at the cellular level. But this power would inevitably have a dark side. Any minor conflict could escalate into a devastating battle, with individuals hurling cars at each other or ripping apart sections of buildings. Controlling this force would become the paramount issue of public safety. New laws and ethical codes would be urgently required to regulate the application of telekinesis. This would not just be an ability, it would be an immense responsibility for which humanity would be catastrophically unprepared. The second ability is total empathy, graduating into full telepathy. You wouldn't just sympathize with someone, you would literally feel their emotions as if they were your own. Joy, fear, pain, love, all of it would become a shared field connecting everyone. Lying, as we understand it, would simply vanish. You would instantly sense the mismatch between a person's words and their true feelings. This would lead to incredible openness and honesty in all relationships. Imagine a world without deception, without hypocrisy, where all intentions are transparent. Diplomatic negotiations would turn into sessions of collective understanding, making compromise much easier to achieve. But there would be a major drawback. You wouldn't be able to escape the pain of others. Walking past someone suffering from depression, you would instantly sink into their despair yourself. News of a disaster would trigger waves of collective grief that could effectively paralyze entire cities. People would have to learn to build mental blocks just to keep from going insane from the emotional noise. Psychotherapists would evolve into emotional hygienists, teaching people how to filter the constant influx of feelings. Eventually, this empathy would develop into full-fledged telepathy, the ability to read not just emotions, but concrete thoughts. This would fundamentally change the concept of personal space. Your deepest secret could be accidentally overheard by a stranger on the street. Privacy would become the ultimate luxury. People might start meditating for hours on end, simply to learn how to silence their thoughts and achieve inner stillness. The third ability is instant learning and perfect memory. Imagine never having to spend years learning a foreign language. All you would need is to listen to a native speaker once, or perhaps download a language pack directly into your brain. You would instantly speak fluently, without an accent, and grasp all the cultural nuances. Any book could be read in seconds, and every piece of information would be retained forever, down to the smallest detail. You would remember every single day of your life, as if it happened yesterday. This capability would trigger explosive growth in science and technology. Scientists could instantaneously access all existing knowledge within their field, instantly spotting connections and patterns that were previously impossible to see. Any individual could become an expert in dozens of areas, from nuclear physics to playing the violin. The very concept of education would be completely transformed. Schools and universities, as we know them, would become obsolete. Learning would simply become a process of selecting and downloading necessary skills. However, there's a catch. What happens to the value of experience if knowledge can just be downloaded? Would we still appreciate mastery achieved through years of painstaking effort? And how would we live with a perfect memory that never lets us forget a single insult, error, or tragic moment? The psychological toll would be colossal. Perhaps a new service would emerge, memory editing, allowing us to erase or dull traumatic events. This in turn would create a profound ethical dilemma. Do we have the right to change our past even when it causes us pain? The fourth ability is absolute mastery over your own physical form. This goes far beyond mere fitness. It's the conscious command of every single cell in your organism. You could rev up your metabolism to instantly burn unwanted calories, or decelerate it, inducing a state akin to suspended animation. By sheer force of will, you could dictate your hormonal balance, eliminating stress or boosting endorphin levels for instant euphoria. Sickness would become a relic of the past, as your consciously controlled immune system could instantly recognize and annihilate any virus or bacteria. The aging process itself could be radically delayed by initiating powerful programs of cellular regeneration and repair. Imagine healing severe wounds in minutes, simply by focusing your concentration. Athletes would achieve unheard-of levels of performance, meticulously controlling muscle contraction and blood oxygen saturation. The yogis and meditation masters of today, who spend decades achieving partial self-control, would look like absolute beginners. Yet, this level of dominion over one's own biology would inevitably give rise to new temptations. People could endlessly experiment with their appearance, instantly changing hair and eye colour, or even completely altering their physical structure on demand. A new industry of biomodding would emerge, where the only boundary would be human imagination. But what happens when someone decides to switch off the sensation of pain entirely? While this seems like an ultimate blessing, pain is a vital and non-negotiable warning signal. A world populated by the painlessly self-controlled would instantly become far more perilous and injury-prone. This ultimate control would therefore demand ultimate responsibility over one's own biology. Our fifth ability is the mastery of time perception. Imagine your brain accelerating or decelerating its information processing speed, fundamentally shifting your subjective sense of time. In moments of extreme danger, such as a car accident, you could effectively stretch 1 second into a full minute. This would give you ample time to analyze the situation and make the crucial, life-saving decision. For you, the world would unfold in cinematic slow motion, granting an insurmountable advantage. Conversely, when facing tedious work or prolonged waiting, you could compress hours into mere minutes, essentially skipping the unwanted experience entirely. This capability would fundamentally alter the rhythm of human life. Productivity would skyrocket. A complex project that once demanded months could be completed in just a few days of subjective time, executed within a state of hyper-accelerated thought. Artists, musicians, and writers could exploit these temporal pockets, generating masterpieces in mere hours of real-world time. Yet profound dangers lurk beneath the surface of this power. What becomes of a person's psyche if they subjectively experience a century of life, while their physical body has aged only 30 years? An enormous chasm would open between biological and psychological age. Interpersonal relationships would become impossibly complex. Your partner could potentially live out an entire internal lifetime while you were simply pausing to drink a cup of coffee. This discrepancy would inevitably lead to intense alienation and profound misunderstanding. Furthermore, the constant manipulation of temporal perception might cause users to lose their grip on reality, creating the disturbing sensation that the entire world is fleeting, illusory, or even fake. Humanity would be forced to establish entirely new rules of temporal hygiene. The sixth ability is extrasensory perception, or ESP. You would be able to see, hear, and feel far beyond the scope of your 5 standard senses. This includes clairvoyance, the ability to perceive events at a distance or in the future, and retrocognition, which is the perception of the past. Imagine being able to instantly check in on a friend across the globe, or witness pivotal historical moments as if you were standing right there. Archaeologists and historians would have the ultimate research tool. They could simply tune in to the necessary place and time and observe the building of the pyramids or everyday life in ancient Rome. Forensics would achieve a 100% success rate. A detective could simply rewind the crime scene and view everything that took place. But this ability would also destroy all anonymity. Every action you take, even when completely alone, could potentially be observed by someone else. The ability to see the future would generate even greater problems. If you foresee an impending disaster, are you obligated to intervene? What if your intervention only makes things worse? This would create the ultimate paradox of determinism versus free will. If the future is already known, do we truly have any choice at all? Entire schools of philosophy would debate this endlessly. Beyond standard ESP, other senses would also evolve. For example, the ability to see electromagnetic fields, allowing you to navigate space with GPS-like precision, or the capability to sense working electronics. You would perceive the world across far more dimensions than you do today. The seventh ability is next-level lucid dreaming, extending even to the creation of collective dreams. You wouldn't just be aware that you're asleep, you'd have complete control over the dream world. Every night, you could create any world you wished, flying above fantastical cities, meeting historical figures, and experiencing unbelievable adventures. Sleep would cease to be mere rest. It would become a second life, rich with creativity and exploration. Psychotherapists would use dreams to treat phobias and trauma, allowing patients to confront and defeat their fears in a completely safe environment. Architects and engineers could design and test their creations in the dream realm before manifesting them in reality. But the truly astonishing part would begin when people learned to create shared, collective dreams. Imagine a virtual reality generated purely by the power of collective imagination, without any computers or headsets. Friends could meet nightly in a castle they built on the clouds. Scientists from different countries could conduct joint experiments in a shared mental laboratory. This would unlock limitless potential for communication and collaboration. However, the line between sleep and reality would start to blur. Some people might prefer the vibrant and compliant world of dreams over grey and complex reality, leading to a new form of escapism. Dream addiction would become a real concern. Furthermore, who would control these shared dreams? What if someone with malevolent intentions figured out how to create collective nightmares? The eighth ability stemming from body control is cellular regeneration, leading directly to biological immortality. Your brain would perpetually maintain the body in peak condition, repairing damaged cells and flawlessly replicating DNA without the errors that cause aging. You would stop aging, likely stabilizing between the ages of 25 and 30. This wouldn't grant invulnerability. You could still be killed, but death, due to old age and disease, would become relics of the past. The societal ramifications would be colossal. Overpopulation would immediately emerge as the planet's primary threat, necessitating extremely strict birth control measures. The very fabric of society would be transformed. What relevance would marriage hold if it lasted millennia? How would you structure a career when eternity stretches before you? Concepts of family, generational change, and legacy would essentially lose all meaning. Individuals living for centuries would accumulate immense wisdom and experience, but wouldn't they risk becoming ultra-conservatives, effectively stalling all progress? A new form of social stratification would arise, the division between the old and young immortals. Psychologically, enduring eternal life would be incredibly taxing. Boredom, apathy, and the loss of purpose would become the immortal person's primary enemies. You would need to constantly seek out new goals and passions simply to avoid madness caused by the monotony of eternity. Perhaps the right to die would become one of the new world's most cherished values, the option to voluntarily and consciously end your journey once you felt you had lived long enough. The ninth ability is processor-level multitasking. Your brain would be able to divide itself into several independent threads of consciousness. Imagine holding a critical conversation, solving a complicated math equation mentally, composing music and planning your next vacation, all at once. Crucially, every single process would be hyper-focused and entirely efficient. This capacity would radically redefine our work and daily lives. A single individual could handle the workload of an entire department, and productivity would skyrocket to unimaginable heights. You could master multiple disciplines simultaneously, achieving equal proficiency in all of them. Spare time would be leveraged for maximum benefit. One thread reads a book, another watches a film, and a third socializes with friends. But what would the effect be on our core personality? Would we maintain a unified sense of self, or would our identity begin to fragment into multiple sub-personalities, each possessing unique interests and distinct memories? This ability could potentially trigger entirely new types of psychiatric disorders, where these separate streams of consciousness clash fiercely against one another. The very concept of attention would be fundamentally redefined. We would likely stop valuing complete, single-minded immersion in any one process, since we would always be engaged in something else. Deep meditative states might become almost impossible to attain. Furthermore, the ultimate question would emerge: which specific stream of consciousness represents the true me? Or is the I merely the cumulative result of all these threads working in parallel? Philosophers and psychologists would be forced to completely redefine what constitutes personality and consciousness. The 10th ability is probability manipulation. This is one of the most subtle yet powerful superpowers imaginable. Your brain, operating like a quantum computer, would analyze all possible outcomes and intuitively nudge reality toward the result most favorable to you. This isn't magic. It's more like perfect intuition combined with the tiny, precise actions that guarantee the desired result. You would always find yourself in the right place at the right time. When buying a lottery ticket, you'd intuitively pick the winning numbers. Starting a business, you would make unerringly correct decisions. In a casino, people with this power would be unbeatable. It would make life feel like a game played with the luck mode permanently switched on. But this power would ultimately devalue the process of achievement itself. If success is guaranteed, does it still bring satisfaction? The thrill, the risk, and the joy of overcoming difficulty would vanish. Every path in life would become predictable and perhaps boring. Furthermore, if everyone possessed this ability, how would they interact? If two people with this power desired opposite outcomes, for instance, both wanted to win a game of chess, what exactly would happen? Perhaps reality would enter a state of quantum uncertainty, or maybe the person whose probability control was more highly developed would simply win. This would lead to a hidden, invisible competition, where individuals constantly vie to see who could best bend reality to their own will. A society built upon this kind of enforced luck would be extremely strange and potentially unstable. The 11th power is technopathy, the ability to interface with technology using only your mind. You could mentally connect to the internet, control computers, smartphones, or virtually any electronic device. Information searches would take mere fractions of a second. You would simply think your query, and the answer would appear directly in your consciousness. This would represent the perfect human-machine symbiosis. Programmers could write code by simply visualizing it. Designers could craft intricate 3D models, molding them purely from mental concepts. Drivers would operate vehicles via thought commands, making reaction times virtually instantaneous. People with disabilities would gain incredible freedom, controlling exoskeletons or prosthetics as effortlessly as their own limbs. However, this power would usher in a whole new category of threats. Hackers wouldn't just breach computers, they could infiltrate the minds of network-connected individuals. They could steal thoughts, memories, or even implant false ideas directly. We would see the emergence of neurotheft and mental terrorism. Protecting one's consciousness would become the ultimate priority, requiring mental firewalls and neuroantiviruses. Furthermore, constant immersion in a global network could blur the boundaries of the self. Where do you end and the internet begin? Individuals might lose the capacity for independent thought, relying entirely on the external information stream. This could lead to the formation of a collective consciousness, where individuality is completely subsumed by the hive mind. The 12th ability is energy control. Your brain could learn to directly interact with various forms of energy, including thermal, electromagnetic, and kinetic. For instance, you could heat objects using only the power of your mind, generating warmth seemingly from nowhere, or conversely, cool them instantly. This would instantly solve the global problems of heating and air conditioning. You could also generate electricity directly from your body, enough to charge a phone or power household appliances. This would fundamentally change the energy landscape forever. The need for power plants and transmission lines would vanish, and every single person would become an autonomous energy unit. In combat, such an ability would be a terrifying weapon. You could throw ball lightning, generate concentrated beams of heat, or unleash massive electromagnetic pulses capable of instantly disabling all surrounding electronics. However, mastering this skill would be incredibly dangerous. A single error in control could accidentally incinerate you or everything in your immediate vicinity. It would require years of training within specialized, isolated facilities. Furthermore, this capability would rewrite our entire understanding of physics. If a person can generate energy seemingly from nothing, it directly violates the law of conservation of energy. Scientists would be forced to rewrite the fundamental laws of the universe just to explain this phenomenon. Perhaps the brain would learn to siphon energy from another dimension or harness it directly from the vacuum of space. This would unlock technologies we can barely dream of today, such as the creation of warp drives for true interstellar travel. The 13th ability is the power of mental construction. Users could harness the power of thought to forge stable, almost tangible objects from condensed energy or a psychic field. This closely mirrors the abilities of the Green Lantern from the comics. Need a tool? You simply visualize it, and it instantly appears in your hand. Need a defensive shield? It materializes right in front of you. Architects could create temporary, full-scale models of buildings, allowing them to walk through and evaluate the design in real time. Rescuers could use this power to generate durable structures, shoring up collapsed areas. This ability would also revolutionize art. Sculptors would craft their creations from pure light and thought, altering their form instantaneously at will. But like any immense power, it inevitably invites military application. Armies could conjure mental weaponry, swords, spears, or even complex war machines. Battles would become a contest of pure imagination and willpower. However, these constructs would likely require constant mental focus to sustain them. The moment your attention wavered, the object you created would simply vanish. This implies that maintaining complex structures would demand incredible, unwavering concentration. Furthermore, a profound philosophical question would arise. Are these objects truly real? If you create a mental hammer and successfully drive a real nail with it, how does that make it different from an ordinary hammer? It would irrevocably blur the line between thought and matter, between the subjective experience and objective reality. The 14th ability is acoustic control. You would be able to completely manipulate sound waves. This would allow you to perfectly mimic any sound, another person's voice, the singing of birds, or the deep roar of an engine. You could speak loud enough to be heard a kilometre away, or whisper so that only one specific person in a crowd could possibly hear you. You could create zones of absolute silence by simply cancelling out all sound waves in a specific area. This would be invaluable for intense concentration or uninterrupted rest. Musicians could create entire symphonies without a single physical instrument, simply by manipulating the air and generating the required sonic vibrations. However, this ability could also become a formidable weapon. By concentrating a sound wave into a narrow beam, you could create a powerful infrasonic or ultrasonic device capable of shattering buildings or inflicting severe pain and disorientation upon people. Espionage would reach a whole new level. You could eavesdrop on conversations from a vast distance by focusing sound waves from the target location. This would further undermine the fundamental concept of privacy. In addition, you could use your voice for advanced hypnosis, embedding specific frequencies that directly influence the listener's subconscious mind. This would make you an incredibly persuasive orator, but also a dangerous manipulator. Society would ultimately be forced to develop methods of acoustic defense to counter such overwhelming influence. The 15th ability is biological communication. You would learn to communicate not only with humans, but with all other living organisms, animals, plants, and even microorganisms. You would understand the language of animals, not through words but through images, emotions, and intentions. This would fundamentally change our relationship with nature. We would finally know what dolphins are thinking, what songs the whales are singing, and what the trees in the forest truly feel. This would lead to a new, deeper understanding of the ecosystem and our rightful place within it. We could ask animals for help. For instance, we could ask birds to locate a person lost deep in the forest. Farmers could communicate directly with their crops, learning exactly what they need, be it water, light, or essential nutrients. This capability would revolutionize agriculture. In medicine, doctors could negotiate with the patient's cells to speed up healing, or even persuade cancerous cells to stop multiplying. However, this knowledge would impose a massive moral responsibility upon us. If we knew that animals and plants possess consciousness and emotions, could we continue using them for food or for our own selfish needs? This might lead to a global shift towards synthetic food and materials. New ethical movements would emerge, protecting the rights not only of animals but also of plants. Ultimately, we would realize that the entire planet is a single, unified superorganism, and we are merely a small part of it. The 16th superpower is gravity manipulation. Unlike telekinesis, which simply moves objects, this ability would allow you to alter the gravitational field itself within a specific area. You could lessen gravity around yourself to leap dozens of meters into the air, or even run up walls. Conversely, you could increase it, instantly pinning an opponent to the ground. This would make true levitation possible, free flight without the need for any apparatus or equipment. The world's transportation system would be fundamentally changed. Why rely on cars or trains when personal flight is an option? This would solve the massive problems of traffic congestion and air pollution instantly. In construction, raising massive loads would become trivial, simply by creating a low-gravity zone surrounding the objects. But the truly fascinating applications would emerge once humans learned to create localized gravitational anomalies. Imagine generating a miniature black hole for instant waste disposal, or projecting a gravity bubble to defend against impact. Theoretical physicists would finally gain the tools necessary to experiment directly with the fabric of space-time. This could potentially be the crucial first step toward developing warp drive technology for genuine interstellar travel. However, the uncontrolled use of this power would be catastrophic. An improperly formed gravitational field could destabilize the orbits of satellites, or worse, even the Moon, leading to immediate global cataclysms. Gravity manipulation would instantly become the most guarded and heavily regulated technology in human history. The 17th ability we explore is adaptive mimicry. This power grants your body the capacity to instantly adapt to any environment. Submerged in water, you would instantly sprout gills and webbing on your hands and feet. Faced with the vacuum of space, your skin would rapidly thicken, and your body would shift to anaerobic respiration, allowing for extended survival. You could even change your skin color, much like a chameleon, for perfect camouflage. This would make humanity the most resilient species in the universe. We could colonize other planets without relying on complex life support systems or bulky spacesuits. We would simply adapt to the local conditions, be it high gravity, a toxic atmosphere, or extreme temperatures. However, this raises a profound question about the very definition of human. If, on every planet, humans began to look fundamentally different, would they still be considered the same species? This would almost certainly lead to the emergence of numerous human subspecies that, over time, might evolve past the point of being able to interbreed. Furthermore, this ability would revolutionize espionage. A spy could completely alter their appearance, becoming another person, right down to their fingerprints. Identification would become virtually impossible. The societal breakdown of trust would be devastating. You could never truly be certain that the person standing before you was who they claimed to be. New identification methods would become necessary, perhaps relying on a unique cognitive imprint or mental blueprint for every individual. The 18th superpower is intuitive system comprehension. Your mind could instantly see and understand any complex system as a cohesive single entity. By simply looking at a complex machine, you would immediately know exactly how it functions, identify its weak points, and understand how to optimize it. Reading a convoluted piece of legislation, you would instantly spot every loophole and contradiction. Analyzing a nation's economy, you would discern all the hidden connections, allowing you to predict the next crisis. This ability would make us brilliant engineers, economists, politicians, and strategists. Any problem, from repairing a broken device to reforming an entire healthcare system, would be solved much faster and far more effectively. We could design a perfectly balanced and equitable economic model, effectively eradicating poverty. We could engineer cities entirely free of traffic congestion and crime. We could fully understand and model Earth's climate, identifying the precise solutions required to halt global warming. However, this might ultimately lead to the tyranny of efficiency. If a single, mathematically perfect solution exists for every problem, would there still be room for human values, for creativity, or for the simple right to make a mistake? Society could transform into a perfectly tuned, yet soulless mechanism, entirely governed by cold, calculated logic. Individuality and freedom of choice might be sacrificed completely on the altar of overall efficiency. This would inevitably create a conflict between those who trust intuitive, systemic analysis and those who champion the right to irrational, or simply human, decision-making. The 19th ability is photokinesis, or the manipulation of light. You could gather light photons to create blinding flashes, or conversely, generate zones of absolute darkness. You could bend light rays around yourself, rendering yourself completely invisible. This would be the ultimate camouflage. Spies and saboteurs would become virtually undetectable. However, this power would also have profound peaceful applications. You could project complex, three-dimensional holograms into the air, completely revolutionizing entertainment and communication. Imagine a conference where all participants appear as photorealistic holograms. Surgeons could use thought-generated laser beams as scalpels, performing operations with incredible precision. Light manipulation would also enable new art forms, dynamic light sculptures, constantly shifting shape and color. But, like any energy-based ability, photokinesis would pose serious risks. A concentrated beam of light could become a powerful weapon, capable of cutting through steel. A sudden, blinding flash could trigger mass road accidents. Furthermore, the ability to become invisible would create countless ethical dilemmas related to privacy invasion. Detectors would emerge designed to pick up light distortions and reveal the invisible, initiating an endless arms race, the classic armor versus projectile scenario. And finally, the 20th, the most complex and purely hypothetical ability, is chronokinesis, the localized manipulation of time. This wouldn't involve time travel to the past or future, which would inevitably create insurmountable paradoxes. Instead, it is the capacity to create localized time bubbles, where the flow of time speeds up or slows down. Imagine a scientist working on a complex experiment. They could create a field around their lab where time flows 10 times faster. A single day in the real world would translate to 10 days of research for them, drastically accelerating discovery. Or doctors could place critically wounded patients into a slow time field, buying precious hours to prepare for complex surgery. You could essentially freeze an object in time, preserving it in pristine condition indefinitely. It would be the ultimate conservation technique. However, manipulating time is perhaps the most dangerous endeavour imaginable. An unstable temporal bubble could instantly collapse, erasing everything contained within it from reality. Conversely, it might begin to expand uncontrollably, propagating temporal distortions into the surrounding environment, which could lead to a catastrophic breakdown of cause and effect. Humanity would likely agree to an absolute ban on chronokinesis, reserving its use only for the most extreme and highly controlled situations. This ability would forever remain the ultimate red button, one we would be terrified to press. Let us now consider how society itself would be fundamentally reshaped if all 20 of these abilities became universally available. The immediate and most profound change would be the complete dissolution of conventional inequality. Wealth, physical strength, and even inherent intelligence would suddenly lose their meaning. If you can manifest objects with the power of thought, currency becomes obsolete. If you can regenerate your body, physical prowess is irrelevant. And if knowledge can be instantly downloaded, everyone is effectively a genius. This could pave the way for a truly communist or egalitarian society, one where everyone is equal not merely by law, but by fundamental nature. However, it is far more likely that entirely new forms of inequality would arise. People would begin to differentiate themselves based on their level of proficiency and control over their powers. A new elite would naturally form, those who demonstrate the greatest command over telekinesis, or whose gift for precognition proves superior. Schools and academies would be established to teach control over these forces, and access to these institutions would become the new social determinant. Conflicts between individuals and nations would not vanish. They would merely shift to an entirely new paradigm. Instead of tanks and missiles, the arsenal would consist of telepathic assaults, gravitational strikes, and complex mental constructs. Warfare would become exponentially more destructive and terrifying. Therefore, the fundamental challenge for this new iteration of humanity would boil down to control and ethics. A new set of ethics and philosophy would become the cornerstone of a transhuman society. Old religious and moral systems would simply be inadequate to address these novel challenges. For instance, if you can read minds, what truly constitutes personal space. Does merely wishing harm upon someone mentally count as a crime? If you can see the future, are you obligated to prevent a catastrophe, even if doing so infringes upon someone else's free will? If everyone achieves immortality, does human life retain the same inherent value? Philosophers would be forced to construct entirely new ethical frameworks. The core tenet would likely be mental sovereignty, the absolute right of every individual to the inviolability of their thoughts and consciousness. Any unauthorized telepathic intrusion would be considered a severe criminal offense. New professions would emerge, such as neuroethicists, tasked with dissecting complex moral dilemmas related to the application of these superhuman abilities. Humanity might eventually create a collective mind or global consciousness to collaboratively solve these problems and control the deployment of the most dangerous powers. This would be the largest social and philosophical experiment in history, whose outcome would determine whether humanity ascends into a race of gods or ensures its own self-destruction. The economy as we know it would simply cease to exist. The very concept of resource scarcity, the foundation of all modern economics, would vanish. If you can control matter and energy, you could create everything you need out of thin air. Food, shelter, any consumer goods, all could be materialized instantly through sheer thought. Money would become obsolete. Work, in the traditional sense of needing to earn a living, would also vanish. So, what would humanity do then? Most likely, the main currency of this new world would shift away from money, focusing instead on information, experience, and creativity. People would pursue their genuine interests, science, the arts, exploring the universe, or creating new virtual worlds through collective dreaming. This could become a true utopia, where everyone could realize their full potential without having to worry about daily survival. However, such a world would inevitably face a profound challenge: motivation. If all your basic needs are met instantaneously, what would drive human ambition? What would compel us to strive for something greater? Perhaps the primary engine of progress would become competition in mastery of these new abilities, or the relentless human quest to uncover the universe's deepest secrets. Humanity would finally transition from an economy of mere survival to an economy centered on self-actualization and discovery. Art and culture would undergo a renaissance of truly unprecedented magnitude. Artists wouldn't create static paintings, but instead living, dynamic tapestries of light and sound that directly interact with the viewer's emotional state. Musicians would compose symphonies not merely heard by the ear, but felt throughout the entire body, triggering complex, immersive synesthetic experiences. Writers and filmmakers would craft more than just stories. They would create entire, collective dream worlds, allowing us to fully immerse ourselves and become active participants. Architecture would become living and fluid. Buildings could dynamically change their structure and form based on the occupant's mood or the time of day. Entirely new forms of art would emerge, currently beyond our imagination. For instance, the art of probability management, where an artist might craft a carefully designed chain of happy accidents. Or the art of emotional sculpture, where an empath generates complex emotional states for others to experience and enjoy. Cultural distinctions between nations would likely dissolve completely, facilitated by universal telepathy and instant information sharing. A singular global culture would emerge, one that incorporates the finest achievements of every civilization. It would be a world defined by unimaginable beauty and absolute creative freedom. Science would achieve a breakthrough eclipsing the entire previous history of humanity. Scientists, equipped with perfect recall and an intuitive grasp of complex systems, could solve problems that have plagued us for decades in mere hours. The fundamental mysteries of the universe, dark matter, dark energy, the nature of consciousness, and the origin of life, would finally be unlocked. The ability to witness the past would provide precise knowledge of how the universe and life on Earth truly began. Mastering energy and gravity would unlock interstellar travel. We would cease to be prisoners of our own planet and commence the exploration of the galaxy. In biology and medicine, we wouldn't just conquer all diseases, we would master the construction of new life forms. It's possible we'd even engineer thriving ecosystems on barren planets. The scientific methodology itself would undergo a transformation. Tedious, drawn-out experimentation would give way to direct, intuitive apprehension of the truth. A scientist might simply sense the correct theory, needing only to derive the mathematical proof afterwards. Science and mysticism, disciplines that are fundamentally opposed in our current world, could merge into a single cohesive entity. Understanding the cosmos would then flow not just from logic, but from profound, direct, intuitive insight. Let's consider the darker side of this possibility. What if these abilities were not developed equally across the entire population? Or what if a segment of humanity deliberately refused to use them, seeing them as unnatural or dangerous? This could lead to a fundamental schism, dividing humanity into two or more distinct species. On one side, the superhumans, endowed with near-godlike powers. On the other, the baseline Homo sapiens. The relationship between these groups would be incredibly tense. Baseline humans would feel inferior and vulnerable, driven by a corrosive mix of fear and deep-seated envy of the superhumans. The superhumans, in turn, might look down upon ordinary people, viewing them as nothing more than a lesser form of life. This is a classic scenario found throughout science fiction, and yet it is profoundly realistic. Wars could erupt, pitting technological advancements against raw, psionic might. History is replete with examples where more advanced civilizations have destroyed or enslaved less developed ones. There would be an immense risk that the superhumans, no matter how wise they might be, would succumb to the temptation of establishing total control over their lesser brethren, justifying it as being for their own good. This path would inevitably lead to a chilling dystopia where the fundamental freedoms of the ordinary individual were entirely suppressed. The very definition of reality would become extremely blurred. If we could manipulate matter, time and perception, and immerse ourselves in photorealistic collective dreams, where exactly would the line between illusion and truth lie? How could we distinguish objective reality from someone else's created mental construct? This would immediately evolve into a fundamental philosophical and practical crisis. Humans might completely lose trust in their own senses. A new form of paranoia would emerge, the constant nagging doubt that the world around you is nothing more than someone else's elaborate illusion. To verify reality, special anchors might be created, complex physical processes impossible to fake purely through thought. But the persistent, underlying question would always remain: is the anchor itself just another part of the illusion? This scenario could lead a segment of humanity to retreat entirely into self-created worlds, severing all ties with objective reality. They might live forever in their personal paradises, but could that truly be called living? This question regarding the nature of reality would become the central defining challenge for a new humanity, and the entire future destiny of our species would hinge upon the answer. Personal relationships, love, and family would face radical transformations. Telepathy and empathy would instantly eliminate all ambiguity and deception, which would undeniably foster deeper trust. You would know your partner on the most profound level imaginable. However, the flip side is that this might strip the relationship of all its mystery and intrigue. Furthermore, achieving total understanding of another person could quickly lead to boredom or emotional saturation. Immortality would instantly render the concept of love until death meaningless. People might live together for decades, even centuries, only to separate later in search of novel experiences with new partners. The rigid structures of monogamy would likely give way to far more complex and fluid relationship models. Parenting would also undergo a massive shift. Instantaneous learning and telepathy would allow parents to transfer knowledge, skills, and even core values directly to the child, effectively moulding their personality. But where exactly does education end and cognitive programming begin? Would this not fundamentally deny the child the freedom to define themselves? The traditional family unit, the very cornerstone of society, might vanish entirely, replaced instead by sprawling communes or highly cohesive mental clans, groups unified by shared consciousness and collective goals. How would our relationship with the universe change? Armed with these capabilities, humanity would swiftly understand that we are not isolated. Direct biological communication would enable us to connect with any life forms we encounter across the cosmos. Telepathy and empathy would help us circumvent conflicts rooted in simple misunderstanding. We would cease to be conquerors of space, evolving instead into its dedicated researchers and guardians. We could finally uncover the answers to questions that have plagued us for millennia. Does the universe possess a true purpose? Is there a creator at all? With the power to witness the past and gaze into the very fabric of probability, we could finally grasp the fundamental laws of existence. Humanity could evolve into the galaxy's own immune system, dedicated to protecting life and fostering its continued growth. Conversely, facing the sheer infinity and mystery of the cosmos, we might realize our own insignificance, even with all our new capacities. This might trigger a new existential crisis, not on an individual level, but on a truly cosmic scale. Our ultimate evolutionary goal would then transcend mere survival or prosperity. It would be the complete merging with the universe, the full comprehension of its essence, transforming us into what could only be described as cosmic consciousness. And finally, the most critical question remains: would we still be human? Immortality, telepathy, the mastery of matter and time, these changes are so fundamental that the resulting entity would share very little with contemporary human beings. This would mark the next evolutionary leap, as profound as the transition from single-celled organisms to multi-celled life. We would become post-humans, perhaps the Homo universalis. Our values, goals, and sense of self would be utterly transformed. We might look back at current humanity with the same indulgent fascination and mild condescension that we reserve for our distant, cave-dwelling ancestors. Purely human characteristics would vanish: the fear of death, the egoism driven by resource scarcity, and the limitation of our senses. But in this grand exchange, wouldn't we lose something essential? Wouldn't we lose our very humanity? We risk losing the capacity for compassion, born from our inherent vulnerability, the profound value of love, sharpened by the finite nature of life, the beauty of art created in spite of suffering. Perhaps in becoming gods, we would forfeit the very qualities that defined us as human. This is arguably the greatest danger and the most difficult choice humanity would face on the threshold of this new era. This journey to 100% power isn't merely about acquiring new abilities. It is a total redefinition of what it means to be alive. This is the world we might inhabit if we truly harnessed 100% of our brain power, a world free of illness and deception, where learning is instantaneous and creative possibilities are limitless. Yet at the same time, it is a world fraught with new, unthinkable dangers and the most complex ethical dilemmas imaginable. From telekinesis reshaping the very architecture of our cities, to time manipulation, challenging the nature of reality itself. Perhaps the greatest takeaway from this thought experiment is this timeless truth: immense power demands immense wisdom. The 10% brain myth is, of course, exactly that, a myth, but it forces us to contemplate the incredible potential that lies dormant within every single one of us. And perhaps unlocking it doesn't require superpowers at all, but something far more essential: curiosity, empathy, and the dedication to becoming the best version of ourselves. Thank you for taking this journey with us. If you enjoyed this video, please hit the like button and subscribe to the channel so you don't miss our future amazing hypotheses. Now, the most important question for you: out of all these potential abilities, which one would you most want to possess, and why? And conversely, which one fills you with dread? Let us know your thoughts in the comments below. We'd love to read them. We'll see you next time.